Servant leadership is when the leader says, I basically work for you, right? And the evolution of that is what now I call enlightened leadership. And enlightened leadership takes exactly what's happening in servant leadership. That all still applies, but it goes one step further. It now says, Lewis and Kyle, I'm not here just to help you be successful within the walls of the confines of this business. I want to do everything I can to help you be successful outside the walls of the business as well.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Lewis and Kyle Show, where you get access to behind the scenes interviews with awesome entrepreneurs, investors, authors, and thought leaders in a variety of subjects. Today's episode being no different. In this conversation, we have the pleasure of speaking with Rajeev Kapur about the big lessons from his new book. I have it right here. It's called Chase Greatness, subtitle, Enlightened Leadership for the Next Generation of Disruption. Obviously, this conversation discusses leadership, enlightened leadership specifically. What does that mean? How does it differ from service leadership? How does he implement enlightened leadership into his culture at his own company, 1105 Media, a B2B marketing and events company? And we also discuss what he learned from working in senior management, senior leadership positions at Dell, working very closely with Michael Dell, the founder of Dell, etc. It's a fun conversation. I say that every time, but I mean it every time. So I'm going to switch to it now after a super quick word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Vasa, the virtual assistant staffing agency. We hired our first virtual assistants from Vasa to assist with our operations running the show back in June. But Vasa is not just for podcast editors. If you need some extra hands to free up your time, let Vasa help you with hiring for administrative, technical, and creative work. That's graphic design, cold callers, social media managers, sales reps, video editors, admin assistants, and more. Free up your time to focus on your highest impact work and learn more about Vasa at vastaffing.agency or by clicking the link in the show notes to schedule a free strategy session with their team. Alrighty, back to the show.
Rajeev, welcome to the Lewis and Kyle Show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. So I wanted to first sort of establish your credibility as somebody who can talk about leadership. You've been the CEO of multiple companies, but you started your career in a really unique spot. Working for Dell in the early 2000s when the company was, or maybe it was the 90s, blowing up and changing the world. And I think people don't really realize how big of a company Dell is today and sort of the leadership that Michael Dell had to build such an organization that's been resilient through the years. So if you could talk just a little bit about Michael Dell as a leader and your role in that company and in that growth trajectory.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I appreciate that question. And thank you guys for having me. And I'm really proud of what you guys are trying to do here with this podcast and everything like that. I love your guys' leadership in terms of leading your generation. I think it's awesome. So congratulations on that. So to answer the question specifically, look, I'm going to be very honest. I'm a Michael Dell fanboy for obvious reasons. And to me, he's up here. So he's on a pedestal for me, right? I joined Dell in 1993. Prior to that, I was at a Dell competitor called Gateway. And there's no way you guys probably even remember Gateway, but in fact, you guys weren't born. So in 93. And so pretty much right away, after about 6-7 months being there, I got to work directly for him. And the thing that I loved about him and the thing that I always cherished about my time working for him is that he always figured out how to bring out the best in people, right? He always focused on building a strong culture. He always focused on building and empowering his team to do what's right. And he had no problem in telling you, when you did something wrong or if you needed to adjust or change. And so he was the epitome of what in the 90s we were taught was servant leadership. And, which is, hey, I work for you, employees. And, and we did well, right? And Dell was growing in his leadership and his strategy and his vision of what to do and how to do it was amazing. And so, for me, what he did then, and then, what he's doing, what he did then recently with taking the company private, retooling the company. I mean, think about it. He took the company private when it was like a multi-billion dollar business. So who does that, right? Not many people do that. He took the company private when it was like that. And so it was quite interesting. And so, I remember one time talking to some of my former friends at Dell, they're like, yeah, Michael calls us the world's biggest startup. Right? So here you have this $50 billion company and they call themselves a startup. Right. I think, Lewis, you were telling me earlier before we got on the call that you're basically with a startup, right? Imagine having this attitude that you're this $50 billion behemoth company. You can do whatever you want. And you're probably one of the top 20 richest guys in the world. And you can do whatever you want. And yet he does this thing and he says, you know what? We're going to go back to our roots and act like a startup. And then they did that. They retooled the entire business, and they're crushing it, right? They're number one in the world in everything that they do, and they're fantastic. So to me, it's amazing. It's a great story.
How do you know that history of taking them private? That's got to be, now, I don't know what the stats are, but I feel like I maybe know of SpaceX is like the only other example. And I don't even know if I'm right about that. Like other large.
Well, SpaceX, SpaceX was never public.
Okay.
So what it would be like is if Elon Musk said,
Took Tesla private or something.
Yeah. Or like Twitter, right? He's buying Twitter. So imagine if he wants to buy Twitter and he's going to imagine he takes it. I'm going to take it private and then not leave it public. Right. So you take it private, he retools Twitter, for example, and then he turns off and he goes public again. So that's kind of an example of what it would be like. SpaceX has never gone public. So
was that decision by Mr. Dell motivated by, I guess, if you want to call it like an air quotes, like a good business decision, or was that because like the culture was not enough within his control as a public company? Like what motivated that?
So here's the thing. When you're a public company, there's a lot of benefits. Obviously, stock price, stock goes up. And look, if you're in a public company and the stock is going up, there's never a problem at the company because everybody feels like they're making money and you're looking at your stock options and thinking, oh my God, I'm going to go buy that house. I'm going to go buy that car. I'm going to whatever, right? Oh my God, my future is set, whatever the case might be. And so for Michael, what happened was when the reason why the company went private was because, they needed to retool their business model. Right, the business model kind of got stale a little bit. Now they still sell direct to businesses and consumers, but they needed to focus more on the cloud. They needed to focus more on the cutting edge of where the larger computing and cloud world is going to. And so they needed to do those things. And it was hard to do that when every 13 weeks you have to report to Wall Street. And if you miss your number once, Wall Street punishes the stock and you feel like you're in trouble and shareholders get mad, employees get mad. So he's like, look, I can't retool this company if every 13 weeks, my team. So the saying at a public company is that every quarter is equal to 1 year, right? So every 4 quarters at a public company is like being at a company for 4 years. And so that's what made it difficult. And when you feel like you have to report to Wall Street every 13 weeks, it's difficult to make big changes. And that's what Michael felt like he needed to do. And so he did it. He took the company private. There was a brutal shareholder fight when it happened. And he did it. He took it private. And then he retooled the company. I can't remember how many years they were private, 4 or 5 years. And then they went public again. And it was a success.
You mentioned his model was kind of that late 90s era kind of servant leadership. I don't know if you take credit for your own kind of new model of enlightened leadership in terms of the naming, but do you mind sharing what that overall theory is of kind of this new age version of leadership and the main differences between the old model?
Yeah, no, I mean, a great question. So I didn't necessarily coin the phrase enlightened leadership. Someone, I think back in the 90s kind of talked about this idea of enlightened leadership. Originally, like in my brain when I was writing the book and I was thinking about it, it's almost like kind of like being awakened. But then I'm like, oh, if I do that, then people are going to call it woke and blah, 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 and all that. So I'm like, all right, I'm not going to do that. And the enlightened thing really hit me because you guys, I'm sure you probably studied this idea of the age of enlightenment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So an age of enlightenment happens when there's a change in industry, a change in communication, a change in infrastructure, which leads to different types of industrial revolutions. We saw that happen, after World War II. You saw it happen with the dot-com boom. You saw it, the last, God, how many years here? So you've seen it a few times. And so the idea of enlightened leadership is an evolution of servant leadership, right? In the 90s, in the early 2000s, my generation, the generation, the Gen X generation, the Gen Y generation was taught to say, look, and I'm the CEO of my third company, right? When you're in a leadership position, whether you're the director of sales, whether you're the VP of marketing, the chief operating officer, the CEO, chief financial officer, whatever you are, the idea that you want to portray to your employees is that you want to do everything you can to make them successful within the walls of the business, right? In order to do that, the question is, oh, Kyle, what tool do you need to be successful? Well, I need a better laptop, or I need access to this tool, or I need more money for marketing to figure out our addressable market and our share of wallet. I need to hire more salespeople. Louis, you might say, gee, hey, I'm the chief revenue officer. I need more salespeople. So these are the tools I need to be successful. And the CEO's job is to say, okay, you can have these tools to be successful. We're going to have KPIs, key performance indicators. We're going to hold each other accountable, but I'm going to do everything I can to help you be successful within the walls of the business. That's servant leadership. Servant leadership is when the leader says, I basically work for you, right? And the evolution of that is what now I call enlightened leadership. And enlightened leadership takes exactly what's happening in servant leadership. That all still applies, but it goes one step further. It now says, Lewis and Kyle, I'm not here just to help you be successful within the walls of the confines of this business. I want to do everything I can to help you be successful outside the walls of the business as well. Because you guys are dealing with a lot of stuff outside the walls of the business that could potentially harm your ability to be successful within the company, right? So, for example, COVID, right? Tough economic climates, social justice challenges, climate change issues, diversity and inclusion challenges. There's all of these things that are out there that are taking up space in everybody's brain that could effectively cause challenges to say, hey, I really want to be someplace where I feel like I'm making a difference, right? And light leadership says, I'm going to do everything I can to help you make a difference. So example, in my company, and look, I'm 55. In my company, what I did 3 years ago, and we're coming up now, the next election, the midterm election is coming up like November 8th, right? In like 3 weeks. So at my company, I give every one of my employees a paid day off to go vote. And I think I'm one of very few companies that do that. I think Salesforce.com and a couple of others might. But in terms of companies out there, I actually give all my employees a paid day off to go vote on that day because I want them to feel like they're part of the process. If they don't like what's happening out there in the world, go out there and try to make a difference. So we do that. So we give them that paid day off to go vote. So we shut the company down. They don't have to use PTO. Just go. They don't have to submit a vacation request. No. And then somebody says, well, gee, what if I vote by mail? Well, vote by mail. Go ahead. If you're going to do that, then take that day as a mental wellness day or take that time to get involved in your local community. Go do a beach cleanup. Go be a poll worker, whatever you want to do, but just find a way to get involved, right? That's just a small way of me doing it. Now, the last couple of years we were supporting, we took a small percentage of our profits and we supported Operation Smile. And then my employees feel good about that because they feel like that whatever they're doing, how they're generating business, and look, we're a fairly profitable business. And to take a very small percentage of money and donate it to an Operation Smile, which helps people to cleft palate. I'm sure you've seen pictures of these kids and people have that issue, right? And those people in Africa, India, places like that are ostracized from their community. So we were able to help, I think at last count, roughly 50 people have that surgery. And this year we're actually supporting an amazing domestic violence abuse center called Rainbow Services. And so, where we're giving money to them to help them build shelters for people who have suffered from domestic violence. So it's just small things like that. And so those things don't cost a lot of money. They're like a rounding error to your P&L and to your, so it doesn't matter at the end of the day. And if it makes my employees feel good, they're going to stay at the company longer, right? And that's ultimately the goal, right? As a CEO, people say, oh, well, it's your profit. I go, well, listen, one of my biggest challenges in profit is when I lose my employees. Turnover is high. Like before COVID, turnover was costing US companies like $32 billion a year. Now it's like almost 5 times that because of the great resignation and people want to work from home and companies don't want that. And, and in the next 3 years, it could be even worse than that because the majority of the workforce is going to be Gen Z millennial. For the first time, women are going to be the majority of the workforce. So the essential concept of enlightened leadership, and I hope more and more people embrace this, is servant leadership involved to say, look, not only going to do what I can to help you be successful at the company, I want to try to do everything I can to help you be successful at life. And that's essentially the idea of enlightened leadership.
Yeah. And I think you could perceive it on the front end as not being a capitalist idea, but the people that you're talking about, Gen Z, millennials, and I don't want to say women broadly, but like this group of people that are coming up, are the way that your company is going to be profitable is by serving this need of both profit and purpose. And so it is a capitalist idea fundamentally to create like value in your business.
Right. 100%. Anybody who tells you it's not a capitalist idea is bullshit. Because look, I'm a capitalist, CEO of my third company, right? I'm one of the biggest capitalists out there. In fact, McKinsey, who's probably the largest consulting banking firm out on the planet, has said, if you focus on your people, if you focus on purpose and you focus on improving the lives of your employees, you can see a 7 to 8% improvement of your bottom line because they're not leaving, because you don't have a high attrition and turnover. That, by the way, is probably one of the best capitalist things you could do in your business is increase your bottom line, right? So for example, if you have a $10 million profit business and it's going to cost you 50 grand to donate some money to a shelter or to whatever, and your employees are going to feel good, it's a rounding error. It's nothing, but your people feel good about it. You know what they do now that they didn't have in the 90s and the early 2000s? People talk about that. They put it on LinkedIn. Oh, my company did this. They talk about it on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, or well, I know you guys don't use Facebook, but on Twitter, whatever the case might be, right? And they talk about those things. And so that's essentially it. So you're 100% right, Kyle. It is, in fact, capitalistic because you're retaining your employees. And the longer you can retain your employees, the less expense you're going to have in terms of training a new employee. If you lose a salesperson, a strong salesperson, guess what? You got to hire like 3 salespeople to replace the productivity of 1 senior salespeople, right? That's a lot of money.
It only takes one person not leaving to pay for that charity or whatever you give. If it's 50,000 or 100,000, you can make it make sense from a numbers perspective.
Right. And so look, my company, we don't pay the most money for our employees. We don't pay the least money for our employees either. But man, we do everything we can to focus on trying to build a great culture at 1105. And we focus and we try. And look, in the last coming on a year, in terms of voluntary attrition, we've only lost like 2 employees, which I think is pretty good.
I think it's definitely good. I think, it's 1105 is a B2B marketing firm. And I think what you're describing is really just, it's a marketing problem, or it's a packaging problem, because I think everyone has their own loaded definitions when you say things like social justice, and they're like, they don't want to be, forced to donate to causes that they don't align with, but it's pretty easy to find pretty neutral, feel good causes that I think a lot of it.
Yeah. Louis, you're right. And I went through that same challenge. So this whole idea of voting came post George Floyd, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole Black Lives Matter movement. Look, I'm no dummy. Like the stats tell me that no matter what I do, 40 to 45% of my employee base probably is not going to be supportive of whatever stance I take. Anybody here can go look at, I'm a little bit left of center. I'm fiscal, I'm one of those kind of, for me, I'm more of a purple guy. I'm fiscally conservative. I'm socially liberal. And to me, I realized that no matter what I did, I was going to make people upset. If I do nothing, people are going to be upset. If I do something, people are going to be upset. So if you do, you're damned. If you don't, you're damned. So that's when I came up with the idea of, you know what I'm going to do? If you're not happy with the past president, if you're not happy with what happened, if you're not happy with what's happening in your local community, then you have a right to vote. So go out, vote. So if I said, hey, I'm going to give you guys a day off to go vote, guess what? That helps everybody. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, doesn't matter who you are, Green Party, you can be the Alien Party, doesn't care who you are, you now have a right to go exercise. I'm going to give you that ability to go do it. And so that's my way of giving back to you to say, look, I know no matter what I do, if I take a stance one way or another, publicly people can see where I stand on certain things. But in terms of the company, it's like, look, I'm going to give you the day off to go vote. And that takes care of the needs for everybody.
What are your thoughts on the base camp model of kind of like complete or maximal depoliticization, so many difficult words there, of like internal culture? Just like, I think for certain types of companies, they're better fits or worse fits. Like if it's truly like super objective STEM-based work and it's not about how much rapport you have with your employees. I don't know. Just if you're familiar with the model of like the companies that are like, let's just take no opinion. This is just a place where we contribute to projects and don't discuss the outside world. How do you feel about the companies trying to go in that direction? I think Coinbase also at some point made an attempt.
It's a difficult question to answer, right? And it's difficult because you ultimately have a responsibility to shareholders, right? And so, one of our companies, we have a salesperson and she is extremely political, right? In her public views. But at the company, man, she is the best salesperson on, right? And she's great, and she's sweet, and she's kind, but she just has this belief of certain things. And she works her ass off, and she's amazing, and she's good, and her customers love her. So, dummy, I want support to be successful. I don't have to support her views, publicly. And, look, the only thing I tell my employees is, look, it's hard to have these conversations. It's hard not to have these conversations. If you choose to have these conversations, number one is I'm not going to be your referee. And number two, be respectful. And so this idea of respect and gratitude is something we pound into every one of our employees, right? So for example, that salesperson I was talking about, I've had conversations with her. We go out to see customers together. We've had lunches together. And I tell her, look, I completely respect your views. I'm grateful that you feel like you can talk to me about these things. I'm grateful for what you're doing for the company. I can respectfully disagree with you. We're going to shake hands. We're going to be friends, and we're just going to move on, right? And I can do that with probably 99% of the people on the planet, so don't know if I'd probably do it with Kanye right now, but I can do it with 99% of the people on the planet.
Lewis and I were just talking about the Kanye situation before the podcast started. But I want to ask, it's related, I guess, but a different question. How do you think about fighting the principal agent problem? Like, how do you incentivize people to act as an owner when they are not? And how do you get people to buy in and to act as if they have ownership? I just asked that question twice, but I think.
Well, look, so here's the thing, right? In public companies, chances are you have some sort of stock option plan. You have some ESPP, ESOP program. You have, like you might have your 401k might be matched in equity in stock, for example. So, you have those things. So public companies, it's a little bit easier. Private companies, it's a little bit harder, right? But where you do that is it comes in the success of knowing that they're making a difference. So look, I'm a B2B marketing and media company, right? But you know what our tagline is? Our tagline is your growth is our business. And the thing that my employees get, satisfaction in is that if they do their job, they're helping their customers grow. If their customers are growing, they're being successful. They can add more employees, whatever it might be, right? But here's the thing: it all comes back down to creating a culture. And this, the title of the book is called Chase Greatness, right? And the reason why it's called Chase Greatness is because of that word "great." And that word, can you hold it back up real quick, Louis? Okay. So the word "great." So that word "great" is actually an acronym, and it's in the book. It's in the last chapter of the book. Yeah. And so when COVID hit, I wrote that book. I wrote the word "great" horizontally on my whiteboard. And I kept staring at it. I kept asking myself, gee, what does it mean to be great? And a few days later, I walked up and I erased the whiteboard and I wrote it vertically. And I wrote next to the word G, I wrote the word gratitude. Then I wrote the word resilience. And then I wrote the word empathy, and then accountability and trust. A few days later, I walked up and I erased the word trust and I put the word transparency. Because you can't have trust in a business unless you're fully transparent with what's happening to your employees. And during COVID, I needed to be really, really, really transparent with my employees because we got hit really hard. We lost half our business overnight because half our business was events. We did face-to-face events, right? So you couldn't go to our event, just like you couldn't go to a baseball game or you couldn't go to whatever, right? A movie theater, right? And so we lost all that business overnight. So we were X size, and 24 hours later, we were Y size, right? And so I needed to give my employees and the team and everything to think about, right? And so what I wanted to make sure they understood is that, even though that they don't own a percentage of this business, right? What we're going to do is we're going to create a very safe culture for them to know that they're very appreciated through gratitude, that we're going to do everything we can in this company to be resilient. And we had to make some hard choices. We laid off people, we furloughed people, we did pay cuts, but within 6 months, all the pay cuts came back. We were able to hire back a lot of people. So we were very resilient. And they knew that no matter what happened, I was going to have their back. And that means something, right? We were going to be empathy. I'll give you an example, right? So I grew up in a time when, and you guys may have heard this, is when if you're going to go talk to the boss, you better come with 3 solutions or don't come talk to the boss. Well, guess what? There was no freaking solution for COVID. No one had ever done it before. There's no case study from Harvard I could go read. There's no Princeton or Wharton case study I could go read. You know who wrote the case study? Us. You guys, me, my team. We wrote the case study that they're going to be studying 20 years from now at Harvard, at USC, at Alabama or wherever it might be, at Tennessee, they're going to be reading about, gee, how did those companies survive? But here's the thing, right? So that was really important, and having that empathy and listening to them and saying, look, we've never been through this before. All ideas are on the table. Come and talk to me no matter what, 24/7. And then holding everybody accountable, including myself. I held myself accountable to them. I held them accountable to me, and then very transparent and open and honest with our communication. This is what happened. This is where we are. This is what's going on. These are the things we're doing to make it better. And if the more transparent, the better your overall culture is going to be. So that idea of gratitude, resilience, empathy, accountability, transparency was the title of the book, Chase Greatness. And that's how we got there.
And I think all those things are a habit too. And maybe culture is a habit.
Yeah, you got to do it every day. So for example, Mondays are my one-on-one days, and I try to really focus on, where all my leadership team, we do our one-on-ones. We focus a lot on gratitude. We do a lot of small things. We do a lot of surprises. We do like a lot of like appreciation type things for our employees. We do recognition events on a quarterly basis. We have our next one coming up in 2 weeks, where we recognize our top performers for the quarter, for the previous quarter, our top salespeople, our top managers, our top employees. We do shout outs. We do peer-to-peer recognition, which we call the High Five Awards. So we do a lot of recognition. So you're right, Kyle. It's a habit. You got to practice every day. You don't have to do all 5 of them every day. Just try to do it. If you can do 1 of them every day, 2 of them every day, great. That's it.
At what point were you in your career when you kind of stopped being a senior leader within existing structures and kind of went off on your own? And did you kind of just at first just kind of copy and paste what you were doing there? Or did you kind of say, okay, this is my opportunity to start from scratch. I'm in charge now. This is how I want, blank slate, the culture of a company to be? Or did you kind of just start with, oh, this is how we did things at Dell, and I thought that was good, so I'm just going to start with that and change it over time?
Look, foundationally, Dell is a lot of what I do is foundationally in place because of my time at Dell, right? And, I talk about in the book is one of the biggest mistakes I made in my career was Dell had a very strong culture in the US, in Austin, right? And I remember the day that Michael called and said, hey, Rajeev, we want you to go to China in 2000. And so we moved to China. And I remember going to China, and I talk about the story in the book, and I got there and all excited. I'm the guy from the US and pounding my chest. And this was like mid 2000. And boy, I'm here to transform you guys, and you guys, I'm going to take care of you. You guys are going to fall in line, blah, 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 right? And that was a big effing mistake. And so what you find out really fast is that no one person can transform an entire country from a business perspective or from a company culture perspective. I had to figure out how to adapt myself and my style to fit China, right? While still bringing in some of the best of what I learned from Dell. It took about 6 months to figure that out, but finally we did. And we ended up doing pretty well. And I get more details in the book in terms of what we did and how we did it. But foundationally, Dell is a lot of what I built on and the lessons from Michael. But look, we've got recognized, my teams have been recognized kind of twice for the best place to work, awards. I've been lucky to have a team that's been very innovative. We've been recognized as a very innovative company. One of the companies I had was a startup in the audio technology space, and we were recognized at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, 3 years in a row for best in class, best in show for technologies. So those things are things where that, really important, and, that they go a long way to bring pride to an organization. And I think that's pretty cool. And so, and then, having that pride in your organization is, you feel proud about working at that company.
I think the more relatable question, or not that I think that's very aspirational for a lot of people, to be in that position of leadership and all those awards. But for kind of the average listener of this podcast who's, very early career, like our age, et cetera, what are maybe you enter a team that, I guess 2 questions. One would be what kind of responsibility should be on the early level employee to kind of if they feel like the culture is not a great fit, is that something they should work on, and how should they do that? Or should they just try to find a place with a better culture right away, and because you're just going to grow faster in the right environment? What is your general kind of advice for someone to be mindful of culture when they're just at the bottom of the totem pole?
Well, first of all, I think nowadays the information is so readily available in so many companies, thanks to,
That's a good point.
thanks to
You can go on Glassdoor and be like, oh,
you can go on Glassdoor, you can go social media, all these things, right? But look, a lot of smaller companies, like my company is relatively small. Like, I think our Glassdoor rating is like 3.2, 3.3, whatever, right? The CEO rating is like 90%, which is nice. But look, there's just so much publicly available information now, right? You can go follow the company on LinkedIn. You can go, you can see what employees are saying. You can, but most importantly here is that since you have all this information, asking upfront in the interview process, asking, when they ask people, do you have any questions for me? Yeah. Don't be silent. Talk to me about your culture. How do you guys help them? How do you help employees grow within the company? What is your career path opportunities? Where do you guys stand on purpose and passion, or whatever questions you want to ask, right? But my point is you got to ask the questions, right? So if you go blindly into a company and you don't like the culture, it's a little bit on you, because the information's there now for you to go find it. You should know before you walk in the door, right? What that culture is like, and so there's that piece. But if you, let's just hypothetically say you missed it and you go into that company, then it's a matter of, look, at the end of the day, it's about, if you're a data analyst and you're at XYZ company and you really want to be a data analyst and you feel like, hey, can I stick it out for a couple of years? Yeah, find a way to stick out a couple of years. See if you can affect change while you're within that business. See if you can't go figure out how to go work with your boss and ask him or ask them, say, look, what can we do to be successful? What can I do? But let me tell you the biggest advice I'll give, because people ask me this all the time. The biggest piece of advice I'll give young people like you guys is always raise your hand for the hardest job. Do not take the easy path. Because if you can be successful when it's the hardest job, you will be golden in that company. So I'll give you an example. When Michael Dell called me in 2000 to say, Rajeev, we want you to move to China, I was really pissed, because I was managing the West Coast for Dell. And we were crushing. We were like $1 billion plus business, and we were crushing it. I thought I was going to get this big promotion and all these other things happening. And I remember talking to my boss about it, and it's great. And Michael knows me, right? From a few years earlier, right? Working for him and everything. And he tells me, gee, I want you to go to China. And I was pissed. I'm like, I don't understand. What do you want to China? What did I do wrong? We're doing all these things, blah, blah, blah. And he looked at me and he basically, he didn't look at me because we did this on the phone. He just said, Rajeev, are you done talking? I said, yeah. And by the way, he dropped the F-bomb in there as well. And he goes, listen, one of the things I learned from my mentors is that you take your best people and you don't put them on the easy stuff. You take your best people and you stick them on the stuff that's hardest, that needs to be fixed in the company, and that's hardest to get done in the company, because they're going to go figure out how to dig. If you can fix that, then you can fix anything and you're going to be a hero. So raise your hand for the hard jobs. Raise your hand for the tough assignments. When somebody says, hey, Kyle, I want you to move to Brazil, and I'm just picking on Brazil, to go do this, understand and realize it's not because they're mad at you. It's because maybe they feel like that's a huge market opportunity for the company, right? If they say, hey, Lewis, what are you studying? Or what did you study?
I did computer science.
Computer science, right? So if they said, hey, we want you to go to India to set up an office, like, wait a minute, I don't go to India, out of sight, or blah, blah, blah. No, you want to go to have that experience. Because if you can put on, go out there networking, I'm just picking on whatever it might be, right? So you go and you do that. You go put in your time, you go put in your dues for a couple of years, it might be. You can even go by like that. It's going to go by really fast. And that's going to look amazing on a resume, right? Because if you think about your resumes, can you imagine, Lewis, if you had on your resume, comp sci, you went to India, you did this, or whatever, Romania, wherever it might be, you set up this operation, did this, you hired 50 people, design, data scientists to do this, comp engineers, blah, 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 versus coming back in your resume. And if you didn't do it, your resume would just say, comp sci programmer, 2 years at XYZ company. Which resume is going to be more exciting? Which resume is going to get the better attention from the recruiter, from the hiring manager at the new company? Be that, right? If you want to go get your MBA at whatever, a top 10, top 20 school, whatever you do, what do you think is going to be better to that recruiter, right? It's going to be those kinds of things. So raise your hands. Go out there, raise your hands, and go prove to the world that you're the best.
Mike,
Draws that, and I do love myself some international travel.
Yeah. And I want to touch on
You're living
one
in
thing
India.
you said.
Give me a call.
That was
said
my
earlier.
Kobe.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What I was going to say is I think that the willingness to ask a question and asking questions is a form of leadership too. Like a lot of people will just be silent because they think that's what will make their superiors or whatever happy. But if you're not willing to ask the question, and I think that this is
The dumb question.
of being willing to raise your hand for the hard job. It's just like that is a form of leadership. You have to put yourself in a position to fail and to look stupid, or you're not going to grow and you're never going to be the best at anything.
Yeah, look, I mean, we could joke around about Kobe all we want or Michael Jordan. I missed 9,000 shots in my career, right? But what you want to be able to do is you want to be that first person at work in the morning and the last one to leave, right? And I know people are doing a lot of remote work, so that's it's more about the that's more of the story idea. It's it's just it's an example of the mentality you want to have, right? And so and then like what we talked about, you want to raise your hand, but most importantly, be curious, ask questions, and when you ask questions, ask open-ended questions. Don't ask try not to ask that many yes or no questions. Sometimes you can ask yes or no questions, right? But ask open-ended questions, right? And that's what's going to be key.
Here's an open-ended question. How did raising your kids impact your perception of leadership?
Well, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. I think I realized that I realized early on that I needed to be a really strong example for my boys. And we talked earlier, I have two sons. One's a senior at USC, one's a sophomore at the University of Miami. And being a role model for them was really important, right? And so if I'm a role model for them in a positive way, then that means I think in my mind, I'm being a positive role model for my employees at my company, right? And so that whole idea of servant leadership morphed me to enlightened leadership. If you read the opening of the book is dedicated to the boys, to my sons, because I wanted to leave a legacy for them. And I want to leave a legacy for my employees. I want to leave a legacy for my customer base. I want to leave a legacy for my investors and shareholders. I want people to be able to look back on this in 5, 10, whatever it is, 15 years to say, look, this was an amazing, positive experience. And we really learned. And look, the idea of leadership that most people forget, there's two things. Your job as a leader is to create more leaders. Because when you go to a company, so let's hypothetically say tomorrow, I said, you know what, I'm done. I'm leaving this company. I'm gone. Guess what? The company's going to thrive. You know why? Because I built the best management team around. So that to me is amazing leadership. And I'm not just giving myself a pat on the back. What I'm trying to say is that if you build a company where when you leave, the company falls apart, that's bad leadership. The fact that one person leaving could cause that to happen is a huge problem, right? And I think so understanding and realizing that, understanding and giving my boys the ability to understand and realize that you have to have real strong, and one of the things we talk about a lot in our household is the idea of balance. Look, you can ask my sons. I've not asked them about a single grade that they've received on a report card in probably 7 years. And I don't care. And by the way, I mean, I do care, but I don't, because at the end of the day, it's about their mental wellness and about being able to understand and realize that if they can go out there and make a difference, in their careers, it's going to come from their own internal fortitude. And that's what's key. And because look, I was an average student. I went to a state school. I did my master's at USC. And look, I worked hard. I worked myself. Everything I've done here, I had to bootstrap myself up. And so hopefully that was a good example.
Let's do a couple bonus questions. And then, yeah. So you mentioned before we got started, I don't know if we can chop this out if we need to, but you said you sold a movie script recently. If that's something you're talking about in the open, do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah. The official announcement for it will probably come in about a week and a half, I think. When is this going to go live?
Further than a week and a half from now.
All right. So the official announcement on this will probably come in about a week and a half or so, maybe 2 weeks. Yeah, no, look, during COVID, after I wrote the book, one of the things they tell you to do is after you write a book, they tell you to put it away for a few weeks and then come back to it. And in that few week windows where I put it away, I had this idea for writing a movie script. So, and I needed something to do during COVID because, you couldn't couldn't do much, right? So I started writing the movie script. And so first thing I did was I wrote a treatment, and a movie treatment is essentially a book report on what you want your movie to be, right? So like a 20, 25 page treatment on, it's going to be this, and it's going to have Kyle, and it's going to have Lewis, and this, blah, 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 blah. So it's basically a 20, 25 page book report on your book. That's called a treatment. I didn't know any of this stuff until I just would just go to Reddit, YouTube, and so, how do you write a movie script? How do you write a treatment? Well, first you got to write a treatment. How do you write a treatment? So that's literally what I did, and so I started asking people around, and I wrote this treatment, and it was kind of cool. And I shared that with some people. They said, this is kind of a neat idea. And so then I downloaded some software called Final Draft, which is like the leading screenplay software thing out there. And I didn't know how to use it. So I'd go watch videos on how to use it. And I kind of started writing different things in there, and I find myself getting stuck. And then the editor for my book, I was talking to him one day, and I said, hey, you know anybody who could help train me on how to write a screenplay? And he goes, why? And I said, well, I've done this treatment, blah, 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 and I'm stuck and I'm trying to do the screenplay. He goes, oh, well, that's what I do. I do that also. And really, I didn't know that. And so then he would train me, and then we would go back and forth, and he would help me. And then it kind of became a little bit of a collaborative process working with him. And we had a lot of fun doing that. And then fast forward to February of this year, I got an agent, and I'm also a member of this organization called YPO. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it. Young President Organization, which I highly recommend anybody who's listening, go to ypo.org. That's yellowpeteroscar.org. If you ever want to be the leader of a company, that is the organization must join, period, hands down. It'll be the best business and personal and family decision you'll ever make in your life. So that's my YPO commercial. But I was in YPO, and I was talking to some people, and I said, hey, I've done this. I could use some help. And I got introduced to this lady, and she goes, Rajeev, I used to be the president of Simon & Schuster, the big book publishing company. And I got my own agency, and, I'd like to maybe look at your stuff. So I gave it to her, and she read it. She goes, I like it. She goes, I'd like to be your agent. I go, oh, great. Oh, awesome. All right. And then so she started shopping it for me. And then officially, it was about 8 weeks ago, where we officially kind of went into negotiation. And recently we concluded the negotiation, and we sold the script. And what does that mean? At the end of the day, it really doesn't mean shit, because it's out of my hands now, and it's up to the production company to do something with it. Hollywood is littered with people who buy movie scripts. They don't do anything. And so, but hey, to get this far, and it was really exciting for me because I was born and raised in LA, and you already know I'm a big Laker fan, and I literally am a big Hollywood fan. And I love Hollywood. When I was a kid growing up, people would ask, what did you want to do when you grew up? And I said, I want to own the Lakers and be a movie producer. And so there you go.
Why not both? Can you give us a genre? It's a
superhero 200 years in the future type of a deal.
Now that is the kind of movie that I like to watch. So I'll be on the lookout for sure. I wanted to ask you, I don't know how to really fit this into a question. The golden rule is something that I find a lot of wisdom in. Makes a ton of sense to me. How has the golden rule helped you throughout your career and in your everyday life?
Kyle, you're going to have to go a little bit more detail on what is your definition of the golden rule before I can answer that question.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's how do you want to be treated, right? You treat people how you want to be treated, right? That's basically it, right? Look, I had an old boss. I had an old boss at Dell, and I talk about this in the book a little bit, and I'm not going to use his name, but when I was in Asia, after the China stint, we moved to Singapore, and he decided for some reason he was going to use me as a punching bag. And guys, when I tell you he was a giant frickin' a-hole, he was. And in his mind, he was doing it because I'm the American expat. He couldn't get mad at the locals. He's an American also. He was an expat. And he felt like, I'm going to go beat up Rajeev. And while beating him up, that's going to get the others in line. And he made my life a living hell for a little bit. And then funny enough, one day I got this call from this guy in Austin, and he said, hey, you work for this guy. I go, yeah, because he needed some help with a customer in Asia. He asked me if I could help him. I said, sure. And we started chatting. He goes, oh, you work for so-and-so. I said, yeah. He goes, oh, He's a real pain in the, you know what? I go, he is. He goes, we used to have a saying for him. What's that? He goes, you'd be bruised, but better. And right then it hit me what his MO was. His MO was he wanted to beat the hell out of you to see what you were made of. So he was testing me. And I survived, and I thrived. But what he didn't realize was that he could have gotten way more out of me without being such an a-hole, right? Because I was already primed to do, I was already doing pretty well, right? And so I remember we were going to our next one-on-one meeting, and I walked in, and I was getting ready to just lay into me for something. I said, stop right there. You know what you're doing to me? You know this story? I got a call from so-and-so. Do you know so-and-so? He goes, yeah. He goes, you know what he told me about you? And he looked at me like, oh shit, what did he say? He goes, he said that you're practicing bruised but better. And he sat there and he just smiled and started laughing at me. And that thing right there broke, something in him broke. And after that, he treated me like a son. And so it just comes back down to, treat others like how, the golden rule, right? I mean, yeah, it's, you put into life, you get out of life what you put into life. And if you're going to put all this negative energy in there, if you're going to be an a-hole, if you're going to go on Twitter and be a racist and say all these things, then you deserve everything coming back to you. And by the way, it's not cancel culture. It's holding you accountable.
We just briefly not briefly gone to the golden rule there, but there's like 100, I'm checking in the other tab here, 116 is the live counts of core rules. What is the motivation with that project? And that's also probably a good place to send people who are curious to get more bite-sized wisdom.
Yeah. So if you look at the book, in the back of the book, there's 30 of them. There's like 32 of them in the back of the book.
And it keeps going.
Yeah. And so look, people say, oh, it's a lot of rules. And I go, well, rules are meant to be broken at some level, right? But,
that's what the first rule is, right?
Yeah.
The first rule is that the right thing to do will eventually become the wrong thing to do. So,
yeah. Yeah. And so I think right now there's roughly 234 of them. I don't know if I'm going to go beyond that. I think I might take a break from them and start doing other things with that platform when I get there. I think my favorite one of all time is essentially this, which is, if you want to be a great leader, give people the tools to do their job, and then, get out of their way and support them when needed. That's probably one of my favorites. I think another one is, most people and companies fail not because they do the wrong thing. They fail because they did the right thing for too long, right? You guys, think about what's happening right now, like with Instagram and TikTok, right? Instagram trying to be more like TikTok, right? Facebook is failing, and they're trying to do Meta because at one point Facebook was the way to go, right? But then they didn't pivot. They didn't change fast enough, right? If you think about companies, right? You guys ever heard of a company called Blockbuster?
Distant memories.
Right. So
things didn't work out for them from what I heard.
Right. But did you know the story that the Netflix executives went to Blockbuster and they said, hey, we've got this idea. Why don't you buy us with your distribution channel? You can transform everything, blah, 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 blah. And Blockbuster laughed these guys out the door and said, we don't need you. We're going to do more stores. In fact, they tried to do the Netflix model. They said, screw it. That doesn't work. We're going to just do more stores. And now they're out of business. There's one store left. There's one store left in, I think, Portland, just for fun, I guess. But yeah, and Netflix now dominates and streaming now dominates, right? That's an example. Another example of that is T-Mobile, right? Funny enough, one of my old bosses at Dell, John Leisure, was the CEO at T-Mobile. He came on board, and what did he do? He essentially kind of took this thing and said, look, you've got this old stodgy telecom industry of AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile. And what is it? You can't change your phone. It's all this nonsense, contracts. It's a pain in the ass, all this other stuff. So what did he do? He said, no, we're going to do everything opposite. You want to change your phone every year? Change your phone every year. You want to travel internationally, not have roaming charges? No problem. You want to have a simple bill? No problem. You want to get out of your phone with us? No problem. So everything, he literally turned the whole industry on its head. And, and T-Mobile then eventually, merges with Sprint, and now, the stock price went up 20, what is it? tripled, I think, something like that from the time he's not there anymore, but it does well. So it's just things like that. So it's those kinds of things that you want to be able to look at. And so that's this idea of eventually the right thing to do will be the wrong thing to do. We talked about. So, you got to keep pivoting.
Rajeev, you clearly have, we've barely gotten to small percentage of the stories you tell in the book in terms of additional value and anecdotes you share on social media. Where can people find the book, or again, the title again, if people are just going to default to Amazon, and also the more personal connections to you?
Yeah. So of course, Amazon is a great place to find it. Chase Greatness, Rajeev Kapur, Kapur. It's on, you can find it on, it's your screen's blurry there, Kyle, but yeah, you can, you can find it on Goodreads. You can find, some of the local bookstores are getting it now, which is really exciting. It's available on Kindle. And then hopefully by the end of November, it'll be available on an audiobook format as well. So it'll be available on Spotify and other places as well. So there's that. In terms of my social media, look, if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Rajeev Kapur. It's the name right there, the title of the book. Instagram, it's at the Rajeev Kapur, just because, in India, Rajeev Kapur is like Will Smith. So it's or John Smith, whatever. I think Will Smith is probably bad, but I think John Smith more than that. So, and then on, Twitter, it's at Rajeev Kapur. So I'm pretty easy to find. It's I don't really hide myself. So if people want to connect with me, and if there's things I can help people's companies or help them individually, just reach out to me.
That's going to close out this conversation with Rajeev Kapur. I got his book right here. We showed it on air a couple times because it was in our hands. Chase Greatness, Enlightened Leadership for the Next Generation of Disruption. My ability to memorize titles not being at its all-time greatest strength. 3 takeaways for me, and then I'll send you all to the next thing. Maybe that's the next episode. Maybe it's a meal. Maybe it's a workout. Who knows what the next thing is for you? I don't, because this is an asynchronous medium. That's how podcasting works. Okay. Takeaway number 1 is I liked how he frames, we didn't call it corporate social responsibility in the podcast, but that's kind of like the corporations doing good for the community, et cetera, called CSR. He framed that through ROI, and that made me a bigger fan of the concept by, it's a nuanced subject, because I think a lot of people hear corporate social responsibility and interpret that to mean your company is taking a political stance and they're using some of the profit to support that cause that you may or may not agree with. Whereas he kind of talks about very neutral causes, like helping people who were born with facial structure that could use repair. Like, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good cause. I wouldn't mind if the company I work for gave to that, versus if they gave to some very clearly politically motivated organization. 45% of the company is going to be alienated by that. So one, I liked picking more neutral causes. And then the other one was just framing it as like, if you're 1,000-person organization, it only costs you a few $100,000 a year, and it greatly reduces turnover and makes other people more likely to want to work at your company. That's another situation where, again, like, it actually is helping the bottom line by doing those things. But it also, it does good. So that was a good reframe for me, the way he discussed that. Second takeaway, pretty straightforward. I liked the discussion at the end about taking the hardest job offered to you. That was a great piece of advice. Kind of just, what's the hardest option on the table that still kind of meets your needs and checks your boxes? And that'll be rewarding later on in your career, if not kind of immediately, even though it's hard. And then third, it was about values and habits. So a lot of executives kind of can talk the talk about their values at their company, and their, people like to use acronyms and have a word with the letters that mean things, right? That's the definition of acronyms, for those who didn't know. Anyway, Rajeev, he just kind of had a great answer when I was like, how do you implement those things? And he just was like, well, on Mondays I do this one, on Tuesdays I do this one, and on Wednesdays I do this one. I feel like not very often do you hear an executive or a person in senior leadership immediately cite the examples of what they do every single week to represent their values. So I thought that was a good clap back. I wasn't challenging him with the question. I wasn't like, oh yeah, are you actually great? Like, that wasn't the intention at all. But I was like, just curious. And then he's like, well, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, boom. So if you're ever one of those people spewing an acronym, and if you have an answer like that, people are going to be like, damn, I believe you now more so than I did. That's all I have to say for this conversation with Rajeev. Definitely check out the book on Amazon. Follow him on Instagram if you are an Instagram user. And yeah, that's this podcast. It's the Lewis and Kyle Show. I hope you're subscribed. If you liked this episode, it's pretty easy to subscribe. I'd encourage you to do so. Say hey on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever. Email, you can figure all that out in the show notes on YouTube. using the Google. And yeah, we'll be here in a couple weeks with the next episode. Subscribe so you're the first to know about it, and see you there. Cheers. Bye.